I want to start this episode by saying a huge thank you. I put out a story the other day asking for people who had been through this exact topic that we're going to be covering if they wanted to jump in my DMs and just help me wrap my head around it, because it is really layered, it is really complex, and it is also very sensitive. Today we are talking about family estrangement. I get a lot of messages from people wanting to come on the show as a guest, and sometimes the topics are really juicy, but they're not right for right now. But my guest today, psychologist Alex Hall, came into my DMs at the exact perfect time that I was thinking I really wanted to cover this topic as well, because I can see it popping up everywhere. So we are talking about family estrangement, which is where you actively choose to cut off ties with someone that is biologically family. Some of the people listening today, you might be on the receiving end of this, you might be on the initiation end of this, or you might be trying to navigate, is this right for me? The reasons people choose to cut off family members are so varied. And from the women that I spoke to in preparation for this podcast, it ranged from mental health, physical abuse, differing opinions from vaccinations or financial values. It was not a one size fits all, but what was clear, and there was a thread throughout, was it was always messy. It always took a long time, and there's no right or wrong way to handle it. So, Alex, welcome to Reset. Thank you so much for jumping in my DMs and suggesting this topic. I know that we're going to have a really deep conversation today and look at it from a 360 lens, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Ash. I'm really excited to get into this.
This is a hard one because I know that you personally have experienced it.
Yeah.
I know that on both sides of my family and my partner, who's also called Alex, on his family as well, we've got family members that have broken ties in recent years.
Yeah.
Is family estrangement becoming more common, or are we just talking about it more?
I think in terms of, is it becoming more common? Well, we have a lot of research that suggests it's not really a new concept. There have been, large support groups for this that date back to, 2014, 2012, 2011. So there have been a lot of people receiving support for estrangement for such a long time. I think what is actually happening at the moment is that a lot of people are just talking about it a bit more openly. I think everything that we see in the media when it came to, you look at Prince Harry and Meghan, and even recently with the Beckham family, social media has really given a voice to the idea of estrangement, and there is a lot more information about it now than I think there ever has been. I do also think that, historically there was a lot of, social taboo around this, and it was very hidden, and I think there was a lot of stigma around estrangement and a lot of shame, so not a lot of people did openly talk about it compared to now, and there is so much more information online and those support groups out there for estrangement now. When we actually look at the statistics of estrangement as well, they certainly are growing. So it definitely does seem to be becoming a little bit more common. In Australia, I think the statistic is about 1 in 12 Aussie adults. So roughly about 8% of people have experienced estrangement at some point in their lives. In the UK, it is a very similar statistic as well. Interestingly, a lot of our research in this space comes from the US. So we have a lot more available to us in terms of the information that we have. So the statistic in the US is 1 in 4 adults, which
1 in 4.
Yeah, it is quite a large statistic. So a lot of studies have showed anywhere between 27 to 38% of US adults, right, which is quite a large group of people. They've even actually broken this down to look at, of that group of people, which family members people are estranged from as well. So of that group, they found that 24% of people were estranged from a sibling, 16% from a parent, 10% from a child, 9% from a grandparent, and 6% from a grandchild as well. So it goes to show that it is very varied in terms of the type of family member that people don't have that connection or relationship with. But yeah, certainly this is something that, unfortunately isn't necessarily researched quite a lot, but there is a lot more going into it, and we are getting a lot more information about it all as well.
Yeah. And so when you first approached me about this, you mentioned that you're seeing it a lot in clinic, and a lot of the other psychologists that I'm in contact with are seeing it as well.
Yes.
What are some of the most common reasons that people decide to consciously cut ties with a family member?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many different reasons that people, I guess, take those steps to cut contact with, whether it be just one family member or their whole family in particular. In the space I work with, I work in that perinatal space, I work with eating disorders, I work with trauma as well. And so a lot of the time I find that it is really common around, emotional abuse, that sense of chronic invalidation, or at times when certainly around a process we call individuation as well. So what that refers to is people kind of becoming themselves a little bit more, reassessing their values, reassessing what they want from their life and the things that they're going to tolerate versus not tolerate in relationships as well. And that process of individuation can kind of happen at any stage in people's lives. So we do find that it sometimes does happen around major transitions. I find, when young adolescents or adults move out of home and start to kind of separate their values or separate things that they have been conditioned by growing up. And so they kind of attend therapy and they kind of go, I've started to reflect on these things that I really learned growing up and I don't really feel it aligns with me anymore. Or perhaps I've tried to bring that up with mum and dad and see if they can recognize it, but I'm not being met with that same understanding. And so that's where we can see a lot of that chronic invalidation coming up as well, that people do cut ties from as well. I think another really big thing that comes into it is boundary violations. I know that word is a bit of a I suppose a bit of a hot phrase at the moment for everyone, setting boundaries. But I do find that can come into it when it comes to parenting decisions and money, finances, like you were saying earlier, vaccine decisions, political views as well. A really big, I guess, event that I see this showing up in is weddings and wedding planning.
Yeah.
And that is huge in terms of, I suppose, these days, having planning a wedding, it's not necessarily the cheapest event to plan. And so sometimes people like to keep it small. And that might mean excluding certain family members. And that sometimes can lead to a much bigger event and unfortunately at times this estrangement as well. I think some other areas I do really commonly see this showing up is identity and value rejections as well. So unfortunately in that space of the LGBTQ plus community, there is a really high statistic of estrangement. And I do see that a lot of the time in terms of gender identity and sexuality, and estrangement coming hand in hand with that. I've also seen it in terms of religious beliefs and certain people growing up with certain religious beliefs, but as an adult really kind of questioning those and stepping away from that, that, maybe their parents or siblings don't agree with them deciding to leave or whatever it might be. So again, there is a whole range of reasons why people choose to cut ties with their family, but they are a few ones that I do see.
Do you see it come up as well? I know finance kind of rippled through that, and beliefs and boundaries. Do you see it coming up as well when maybe a parent or a grandparent passes away and it just creates this really tense environment where really what everyone's probably craving is love and a hug, but there's so much stress and emotion involved, and you see it tear apart even the closest of families.
100%. I think any time that anyone leaves our life, whether it be through death, whether it be through divorce, whether it be through estrangement, it puts so much of that sense of grief and loss onto someone. And absolutely, we totally see grief being a really big factor that does unfortunately tear families apart.
This topic gets really polarized kind of viewpoints. One side of things on social media, you will see people talking about it as it's a very empowering act. You put boundaries, you go off and you live a life that feels good, and you surround yourself with your chosen family and all this sort of stuff. The other side of the argument is that we are a generation that is viewing everything as disposable, and we are too quick to make decisions and throw things out like we would throw out clothes. Does the reality sit somewhere in the middle?
Absolutely. I think the decision to cut off family is neither inherently, healthy or unhealthy. It absolutely depends on the context of that relationship and what has been tried versus what hasn't. I think the media's tendency to absolutely kind of create that polarized view of, empowered self-care or selfish avoidance really actually misses the emotional reality that we see, particularly in that therapy space. I mean, the term selfishness in general really, I guess, implies a lack of consideration or thought about other people. The thing with most estranged individuals is, though, they have spent years trying to explain, trying to, I guess, change things, trying to get understanding, or trying to just be the bigger person, that they have actually put those family relationships first before themselves for such a long time. And so to me, that kind of notion of it being selfish or it being a selfish decision, it may not be, I guess, seen as something that was thought about to the other person. It might seem very quick, it might seem very sudden, but for these people going through it, they have thought about it for such a long time. They've been sitting on it. They may be seeking support or talking about it. And so I don't necessarily think it's a super selfish thing. I guess what we see on the other side of it as well, that narrative around the empowerment. There's certainly this idea on social media that after cutting contact with family or after making the decision, you should feel relieved, you should feel confident, and you should feel really freed. And that's not necessarily the case. Speaking from experience, I know that making that decision at times comes with so many different emotions. It doesn't just fall into one single feeling, right? Like that sense of empowerment. It can feel really sad. It can feel really heavy, and it can feel really disorienting to know whether you've made, the right decision or you've done the best thing for yourself. And I think a really big kind of thing with this is that there is so much of an emotional contradiction when it comes to estrangement. You will have moments where you feel guilty, and you'll have moments where you feel relieved. You'll have moments where you feel calm, followed by moments of that deep sadness. You will have moments where you feel that sense of strength, and then you'll have that moment where you just feel that sense of longing for family as well. I think a big thing with this as well is people aren't stepping away from strangers. They're walking away from people that they loved and that they do still love. They're walking away from people that they needed, and they're walking away from people that they wish would change. And so that decision is not necessarily going to feel powerful at all. So the issue becomes when we tend to polarize them as these two extremes, we do really miss this little bit that sits in the middle, that all of these emotions are going to fluctuate, they're going to feel confusing, and that is a normal part of that attachment rupture that happens. And I feel that when we actually give it space and allow it, allow us to see it as a very complex and nuanced decision and thing, what it does is it doesn't make those people feel that they have to justify their decisions to anyone. What it actually does is it allows them to feel supported in their emotions, in their feelings, in their decisions, whether or not we agree with them.
Yeah, and I guess that was a common thread that ran through all of the different women that I spoke to in the lead up to this episode, that it was never an overnight, we had a disagreement at dinner, so I'm going to cut this person out of my life forever.
Yeah.
There was often this prolonged, messy experience that went with it. And a lot of them kind of, from what I was reading, suggested that it was the labels of what family should mean, or like a good family member should be, or like a good daughter or a good niece or whatnot. Has the notion of what good and perfect family should look like made it even more confusing for people?
Totally. And look, I think if anyone ever says they have a perfect family, it's certainly not the case. But absolutely, these rules that have kind of conditioned us or defined, that idea of what is it means to be a good sister, a good brother, a good son, a good family member have certainly made it a lot harder for people to step away from family. And a lot of the time people will stay longer because of that guilt that comes up due to these kinds of roles of being a good family member. I think a lot of the time historically estrangement has been really rooted in that idea of like loyalty and sacrifice and obligation to your family. And so when someone does consider stepping away from that, it's not just navigating the relationship dynamic and how difficult that is. It's also about, I guess, dealing with that internalized idea around, yeah, what does this mean for me? I've got to be this perfect person for my mum or my dad or my sister. I've got to be this good person. And grappling with those two different extremes is really, really difficult. And it's really hard to step away from that. Absolutely.
And I guess everyone's situation is unique, as we spoke about before, but is there a process that people should go through before working out, do I want to cut ties? Should they, like, what would you recommend as a psychologist if they're sitting on the fence right now?
Absolutely. I mean, something I want to note is that it's absolutely okay to sit on the fence. It's okay to not be sure about what to do in this. It's okay to want to move slowly with it and not make that real pressured decision either. I think something with estrangement is that it doesn't have to be a forever decision and you can change your mind over time. So really what it's about is going with what feels right for you or what feels safe or what feels respectful for you in this moment. A lot of the time when it comes to making that decision, I would often recommend people to reach out for some support, not because making that decision to cut off family, you have to be sure about it or it's the wrong thing to do, but more so because therapy can provide that space to explore the emotions that they're experiencing, to want to, I guess, understand their decision and where that's coming from. It can also be a really great space to also explore, is there any other options before I do cut family off? Things like family intervention. So a lot of the time with the people I work with that are experiencing these things or going through it, I will often work with family therapists and sort of say, I would recommend all of you kind of going and talking about these things and finding a way to see if we can move through it all. So that can be really helpful. Setting boundaries as well. And I think the thing with boundaries is a lot of the time we think we have to set boundaries for the other person. Right. And there is a big push on, oh, we'll just say this to them or just put in that boundary towards them. Unfortunately, for some people, there are others that will overstep those boundaries no matter how many times that you do set them. And so it's also about boundaries for yourself, right? How long am I going to give myself until I actually go, you know what? I am done with this. I do want to move past and I do want to have that, space and time away from them. So it's not just about boundaries of others, it's boundaries for yourself as well. And so definitely reaching out for some support and being able to talk through those things will be really, really helpful for anyone who's going through that, but particularly if you're not sure.
And from a psychologist's perspective, is it better to tell the person that you want to end the relationship, or is it better to walk away? Or again, is it case by case, depending whether it's a physical safety issue or just a disagreement about a certain topic? How do we navigate that?
Totally. And look, I think universally there is no cut and dry answer or rule for that. I think it definitely does depend on the context. A really big question I do get people to kind of consider in that space is not the question around should I explain, but rather why do I feel the need to explain? So really looking at, I guess for some people, that urge to want to explain doesn't necessarily come from a place of clarity or choice. It really comes from that conditioning that we were just talking about, from being that responsible person within the family, from being the good one, the one who just smooths everything over, who justifies their feelings and their emotions because they don't want to come across as being cruel or unkind or ungrateful or dramatic, whatever it might be. And so sometimes that explanation really just acts as, I suppose, another form of trying to get that acceptance or understanding. or I suppose reducing that level of guilt. And so when we're making that decision to explain from that space, it may not be super meaningful, and it may just feed back into those rules that we've created and those obligations that we feel we have. I suppose, though, on the other hand, when people feel that they're making that explanation or giving that explanation from a place that is more grounded, I suppose, this is what's true for me. It's not about getting you to understand or trying to convince you. This is truly how I feel. A lot of the time in those moments, in those instances, it feels so different in the body. And so that can feel a little bit more meaningful when I'm explaining because this is my truth and I feel comfortable in that, not because I want it to be met with understanding, not because I want it to be met with acceptance. I also think sometimes as well, the most honest thing we can kind of say to ourselves is that I actually don't need to explain myself to be able to choose this decision. And so in those cases, stepping away quietly can absolutely be just as valid.
One of the recent listeners, she described her experience like a snake in a barbed wire fence. Have you heard this one before?
No.
Yeah, so she said that if she went through life as the snake, where it slithered past the barbed wire fence and it got a nick on the tail, right?
Sure.
The snake could be angry at the barbed wire fence and think, you know what? I am going to show that fence a lesson. I'm going to wrap myself around that fence so tightly and teach it what it did wrong to me. Yeah. The fence has no clue, and the snake is just going to be in more pain and eventually bleed to death. It was quite a visual graphic, but I was like, I get it.
Yeah.
And so she chose to move away from the barbed wire fence, knowing that nothing she could have said or done was ever going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really nice visual of, how tough it can be and the amount of pain. I think really what that's talking about there is the amount of pain that you can experience. I think it also shows the two sides of it, right? The barbed wire fence that has no idea what it's done and the snake that's like, oh, every time this happens and every time I'm hurt and I can't do this anymore. Yeah.
And the stronger I cling to this, the more pain it actually causes me.
Exactly. Definitely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Another listener, she shared a different visual and she said she went through many years of her life choosing to be estranged from her father. And she said for quite a while it felt like, why me? And what am I missing from my life? I'm missing this father figure. And she said it's not until recently that she's sort of reframed it. And she said it's like a deck of cards. You get dealt certain kings and queens and things in your life and you choose to play that hand as well as you can. And she's like, okay, I don't have this textbook great father figure in my life, but that's okay because I have all these other beautiful male role models around me and I have great women in my life and I have great friends and my chosen family. And so it was just flipping that to rather than like a place of lack and what am I missing to, well, what do I actually have here and what am I going to be grateful for?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is definitely something that I will do in the therapy space with a lot of the people that I work with as well, because I think definitely, I was quite young when I decided to step away from my family member. I think I was about 16 or 17. So that's a very developmental, a very big developmental time in your life. And so it can really make you question, especially because I think for some people, when you step away from one family member, we also have to recognize that other family members might make that decision from you too, right? And I know that me stepping away from one person in my family did have a flow-on effect to other family members as well. And it meant that I also didn't have them anymore as a result of a decision that I made. And it could be so easy to go down that path of, well, now I do have to just, make amends, or I do have to because this is the family. And I think a lot of the time those old sayings around, blood is thicker than water and family's everything. You've only got one family, so you've got to make the most of it. It does really kind of get you to go, well, maybe I do have to just, with the cards I've been dealt, maybe I do have to just accept this, and maybe I do have to just go along with everything. But when you do take that step back and we do reframe that decision around not just oh, woe is me, and this is my life now. I made this decision. I've made my bed. I've got to lay in it. You can go and look for, like you were saying earlier, that chosen family. Find those other role models in your life. Find those other people, in those friends, in therapists, in other people that you have in your life to support you through that, for sure.
Yeah. And it's one thing as the initiator of the estrangement to choose whether or not you go to the family event. What advice do you have, though, for family members who maybe are sitting on the sideline and thinking, you know what, I've planned, let's use a wedding as an example, and that person wants to invite both family members because they still have a relationship with both to the wedding. How do you navigate that as the family member on the sidelines? You're not involved in the estrangement directly, but it's really complex.
Totally.
How do you go about it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time for that person in the middle, it can bring a lot of stress, so much stress, because you're not just thinking about your own event, which should be a time of incredible excitement, something like a wedding, right? Yes, it has a lot of stress tied to it, that's for sure. But it is something that is very exciting. And so I think, it adds that extra layer of stress on top of it, because people often take on the feelings of other people as well. And so they start to go, oh, well, I need to make sure that this person feels comfortable and this person feels comfortable, that they really then neglect the experience of that event for themselves, right? And some people might say it is selfish, but a lot of the time I would say, focus on you, focus on what you want from this event. Both of those people, right, should hopefully understand that, for our daughter or for our sister, we want to make this day special. And so we're going to, I suppose, be on our best behavior and not interact with each other. Look, when it comes to weddings, there are things you can do in terms of sitting them totally across the room and nowhere near each other. But I do think it is really complicated. But I want people to know, who are in that space that is kind of in the middle of estrangement, is that you don't have to choose sides. You don't have to agree with either person either. You can just kind of go, okay, yeah, this is happening for them, and it seems really crazy. I don't really understand it, and you don't have to understand it. And also, it's not your responsibility to manage their emotions and what's going on between them. At the end of the day, both people should be able to figure out how to put their own boundaries or their own scripts in place to be able to work with each other for that specific event.
And at the end of the day, I guess there's just going to be some things that are really ingrained in people that cannot be changed. Like, some of the reset listeners said that they refused to go to events that the other person was at, and they would get their mom and their auntie and people saying to them like, oh, just come, it's just Uncle so-and-so, that's just what he's like. But then to extreme ends, where one listener told me, and everyone that has shared these insights with me knew that I won't be naming names, but these answers are allowed to be shared on the podcast, so we've had permission to share this. But she had an uncle in her family who was a pedophile. And she then had a child and decided, you know what, enough is enough. We are absolutely cutting ties here. Her auntie said to her, that's okay, you have a son. He's not interested in boys. You should still come to the event.
Oh my gosh.
And so, I mean, there's all ends of extremes, and I guess everyone's version of reality is relative of why you chose to be estranged from a person. But I think there's varying degrees of a differing of opinion on a certain topic to physical safety. And it is messy. And no matter what the topic, clearly there are going to be people in your family who will just try and like smooth things over and say, oh, just come because we're family, and 100%. You can't win in that situation.
Definitely. And that really speaks to that sense of, I guess, loyalty and endurance that family bonds have come from. Like, you've got to endure it no matter what this person goes through, no matter what they do, or no matter who they are, you just have to endure it. And I often will say to people, you can opt out. You don't need to attend events out of obligation, or because it's so-and-so's birthday, or because it's this person. If you don't feel that you want to be around those people, you can absolutely opt out and not go. That is a valid option. And I think a lot of the time that does happen for parents when they have their own kids, is they really start looking at it from the lens of their own children. And so many people often will accept it and endure it for themselves. But once a little person is involved,
Yeah.
oh gosh, no way would I want my child experiencing that as well. So yeah, I'm totally going to take a step back.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you can't have relationships with the other family members that you do love and have a great experience with, but maybe it's outside of that event and it might be individual catch-ups or something like that. And it's sure, it's not ideal, it's not Hollywood family perfection, but there's ways around it of maintaining bonds.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah, definitely. And I often find that sometimes those one-on-one interactions are so much better than the stress involved in that, like you say, kind of that Hollywood family picture. But if we look at Hollywood families, you know, there's certainly nothing to go by. So yeah, definitely. It is sometimes easier to have those relationships with other family members one-on-one than in bigger environments.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the women I spoke to in the lead up to this, they said that they tried to repair relationships and it would be this messy back and forth dance that often didn't end well. Two women told me that they did repair the relationship. It was never great, but there was enough boundaries put in place that it could feel a little bit cathartic and a little bit like, I don't know, a piece of closure or growth or something like that. But only two out of everyone I spoke to. And so how common is it to actually be able to come back from this?
Yeah, definitely. So repair is absolutely possible. There are caveats to that though. And I think there was actually quite a large longitudinal study in the US that followed though a really large group of participants, and what it actually showed is from that group, and I think there was about 9,000 people in that study. So look, it's fairly large, but what it actually showed was I think 81% of people had actually ended their estrangement with their mothers and 69% with their fathers. Right. So from that study, it does seem like a lot of people did repair that relationship. Look, it wasn't the same relationship as it was before. And the thing with repair is it's never going to be the same relationship that it was before. It is okay if this new form of contact or reconnection does involve a lot of boundaries or does involve moving slowly or being more cautious, again, from both sides. I do feel that repair is only really possible when a few things come into play. So there has to be a bit of willingness and openness from both sides to be able to kind of be open to understanding each other's perspectives. Also, when there is a sense of accountability for any harm caused and when we focus on impact rather than intent. And so what I mean by that is a lot of the time people tend to sort of say, you know, well, that wasn't my intention. I didn't mean to do that though. And so when we focus on that, it can still feel really invalidating to that other person, right? Okay, sure, maybe you didn't intend to, and this is still how I felt. So when we focus on the impact then, so impact statements would be, oh, I really see how that would have impacted you. I can see how much hurt that caused you. When we say it that way, it doesn't mean I don't agree. It doesn't mean I agree. What that actually does mean is that I see your hurt, whether or not I agree that I intended to do that or that should have hurt you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then we also have, I suppose, a really, really crucial part of this being boundaries again, and making sure that both people are setting those boundaries and are aware of the boundaries that you're putting in place. So even sitting down and having a discussion about what that relationship will look like moving forward, the boundaries that both sides want to start to put in terms of how do we communicate, when do we communicate, how often do we want to be seeing each other, and work from there. The core part of repair is that both people need to be willing to make that repair. When one person is really, really attempting to make that repair or trying to make that repair, sometimes it can make that hurt a little bit deeper, or it can escalate things. So both parties do need to come to the table with that. And yeah, as you've said, it's always going to look different, that relationship moving forward. Yeah.
As a mother of a 5-month-old daughter, what can I do to set our relationship up so that in the future, of course, we're going to have differences of opinions and we're going to grow through life and there's going to be messy periods. But what can I do to try and minimize her ever wanting to cut me off completely? Like, how do I need to show up?
Totally. So yeah, definitely. I love that you said, there's going to be moments where we're going to disagree, where we're not going to have the same opinion on things, where we're going to have an argument. This comes to that whole process of ruptures and repairs in attachments. It is so common, and every relationship will have a rupture of some sort. Yeah, we can't always agree on the same things. We can't always have the same opinions, right? Life would probably be very boring if we did.
Very boring, yeah.
And so what is most important is that repair process, right? So ensuring that even if I don't agree, even if I don't see the same view, kind of going back to her, maybe a couple of hours later when things have settled down and going, look, I know we didn't see eye to eye on that. Help me understand what got to you in that moment, or what hurt the most, right? And that's where those impact statements will really come in. Oh, I see how that would have hurt. How I was seeing it was this way as well, and really just trying to repair it, especially if we have caused any harm, or if we've said something that we don't mean or we regret. We've all been in a situation where we've said something and we go, I really shouldn't have said that. A lot of the time we do that in our head, but we don't often go back to that person and go, you know what, that came out a little bit too harsh, and I really didn't mean to say it that way or come across that way. I'm really sorry. And it is that repair process that, especially in therapy, I'm seeing most people in this space are not getting or not receiving. And so I would say for a lot of parents, it is really that repair process that is important. It's not about making sure you don't have ruptures or you don't ever engage in arguments or things like that. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that they read this thing around treating people like guests in your house. And I was like, okay, what do you mean by this? And they said, treat your children as you would guests in your house. When someone enters your house, you might have disagreements. You might have conversations that you don't necessarily align on or you don't agree on, but we don't necessarily engage in a screaming match towards them, right? We probably do have more polite, more calm conversations with them. Yet with our family or with our children, there is that level of perhaps emotional safety where people do show really big emotions. But I really liked this idea around treat them like a guest in your house. How would you treat someone who was a guest in your house? And that certainly has made my mindset shift a little bit in terms of pausing, reflecting, and slowing down before I explain anything to, my partner or my family as well.
Yeah, such an interesting way to look at it. And something my partner and I are trying to do is make sure that as we grow through life as parents, that we never try to put ourselves on a pedestal of, well, I'm the adult, so I must be right.
Yes.
Because there's going to be so many times where we're wrong, and permission to be wrong and grow and change and pivot throughout our lives hopefully gives us a little bit more grace to be human as we go. And I guess our children are some of our biggest teachers, and so we're excited to see what we learn from her along the way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It is that accountability, but that compassion and permission at times to not have it all and to not know it all, definitely.
If someone's listening right now and they've been on the receiving end of estrangement, and they might be confused as to why, they might be hurt, they might not know what to do next, but what advice would you give them if they did want to try and repair the relationship? What is the first step, knowing that a lot of time could have passed and the person, again, like you said, they might not necessarily know why they hurt the other person, but they just have to know in their bones that that person was hurt. And so reaching out is delicate. Totally. Where do they begin?
I think a lot of the time, this is a really tricky concept to navigate. I think for a lot of people, I think with, my family member, they're blocked on everything. Yeah. So for them to reach out to me, they would have to go through, someone like my sister or another family member as well. And, there are certainly times where that other person, so the person who's made that decision or has engaged in that, process of estrangement, might feel that they're ready to actually go, you know what, maybe I will give this person another chance. And so for the person on the other side of it, absolutely, it hurts when you're cut off. It hurts when you don't know why or what role that you might have played in this, and that you do really want to repair it. You want to try and fix it. Yeah. Sometimes trying to fix it too quickly, as I said earlier, really does escalate things, and it causes more hurt on both sides, because you might not get that understanding that you want. You might not get that sense of closure or that ending that you wanted as well. They often call it ambiguous loss when the person is still on this earth, but they're not in your life anymore. And I think that's what people really struggle to sit with the most, is that sense of ambiguous loss. What I would say is if you do have ability to contact that person, I think certainly trying to reach out, and I've heard this with people that I work with, I don't want them to just reach out on my birthday and say happy birthday. I don't want them to just say Merry Christmas. I want them to acknowledge when things have gone wrong. I want them to kind of send me a message and say, I'm really sorry for whatever has happened. I'm not entirely sure what's gone on, and I would be open to a conversation or to hearing you or listening to you and trying to work this out. That is pretty much what most of the people I work with just want to hear from these people. They don't want that contact where it's just, happy birthday, hope you have a great day, and it's very much, oh, thanks. So I think if you do have that connection, if you do have the ability to message that person, reaching out and taking accountability, even if you're not sure what for, there is always 2 or 3 sides to the story. And perhaps there might be more of that, I guess, reciprocation to engage in that conversation then. Otherwise, sometimes it is just sitting with the fact that there may not necessarily be a repair process. There may not be an end to this, and really trying to seek some support around that or attend support groups where you can openly talk about that experience to other people as well, I think will be really, really important.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I know one in particular that I'm thinking of right now, one of the listeners, she said that it actually felt great when those happy birthday, Merry Christmas texts stopped, because it just felt like a icky reminder that this person was sort of lingering but putting in very bare minimal effort. And it just felt better when they stopped altogether, because then she also did not need to dabble in any kind of superficial responses.
Obligation to it. Yeah, definitely. Totally. And I sometimes say to people, you don't have to necessarily respond to those messages either. You can acknowledge that they've come through. Sometimes for some people I work with, the second their phone lights up around those days or those moments, they're almost anticipating that message, and it adds so much stress to that time and so much anxiety. And sometimes when those messages do stop, finally people go, oh, I don't have to worry about them messaging me anymore. So definitely.
Alex, what haven't we spoken about today that you think more people need to know?
I think perhaps just the lasting emotional impact of estrangement. So there was actually a study done in Ireland. Yes, it was a very small study, so we can't necessarily take too much from the results, but what they really looked at was those lasting emotional impacts of estrangement, and what they showed was that feelings like stress, anxiety, anger that were really present at the time of making that decision, they were still present, but maybe a little less prevalent between 18 months and 10 years. Right.
Okay, so it really does take time.
That is a very big time, and it goes to show that for some people, 18 months after they've made that decision, they might start to feel less anxiety. They may start to feel less stress or anger. Yet for some people, it might take 10 years for that to happen. Okay. And so knowing that you don't have to compare your experience of estrangement to other people is really important, because no 2 people are going to have the same experience, especially around their emotions.
Yeah. Alex, thank you. That is a difficult topic, and everyone's journey is very unique, but hopefully we've shone a little bit of light on just how messy it is. And if anyone is looking to have a bit of support through this, I will link in the show notes where they can find you and talk more. But Alex, thank you for joining me in the Research Studio today. I really appreciate it.
It's been lovely chatting with you, so thank you for having me.